My name's Tyler. I'm 29, and up until last year I thought I had a pretty normal family dynamic. I'm not super close to my extended family, but I've always had a soft spot for my Uncle Ron. He was my mom's older brother, the kind of guy who didn't really care about keeping up appearances, but always treated me like an adult, even when I was a kid. He had this old cabin up in Vermont, nothing fancy, just a one-story wooden place by a lake that always smelled like cedar and coffee. When I was a teenager, I spent 2 summers there helping him fix the dock and repaint the porch. Those are some of the best memories I have. He passed unexpectedly. It hit me harder than I expected. I didn't even think about inheritance or anything like that. He wasn't a rich man. The cabin was probably the most valuable thing he owned. I always figured the place would just stay in the family somehow, maybe get passed to one of my cousins, or something, but it never occurred to me that it could become mine. I remember how peaceful it felt to be there, away from the noise of the city, where time seemed to slow down and things made more sense. The cabin wasn't perfect. It had cracks in the floorboards and an old wood stove that barely worked, but it was home in a way no apartment ever was. A few months after the funeral, I got this thick envelope in the mail from his lawyer. Inside was a letter and a copy of his will. That's when I found out he'd left the cabin to me, not to my mom, not to be shared among family, to me. In my name, no conditions attached. I actually teared up reading it because it felt like such a personal, deliberate gesture. The lawyer's letter said we'd need to meet to finalize some paperwork and transfer the deed officially. I immediately called my mom to tell her, expecting her to be happy for me. But she didn't pick up. I figured she was busy and didn't think much of it. I even left a voicemail, but she never returned my call. It was strange because this was the kind of thing she'd usually be excited about, or at least curious. I kept checking my phone, hoping she'd get back to me, but days passed without a word. That silence made me uneasy in a way I couldn't explain at the time, but I pushed it aside and tried to stay positive. A week later, I called the lawyer's office to set up the appointment, and that's when everything got weird. His assistant sounded confused and said the cabin had already been sold. I thought maybe there was some mistake, so I asked who sold it. She hesitated for a second and then told me it had been sold by my mother, acting as next of kin. Stomach dropped. I told her that was impossible because the will clearly left the cabin to me, and I hadn't signed anything or given anyone permission. She said she'd have the lawyer call me back, which he did later that afternoon. That call still makes my blood boil. He explained in this calm, lawyerly tone that my mom had presented some alternate paperwork claiming the cabin was part of the estate she was managing. And since the sale had already gone through, there was nothing they could do at this point. Sat there in disbelief, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. It felt like the ground had shifted beneath me. How could she do something like that without even telling me? I tried to argue, to ask what options I had, but he just repeated that the sale was final. The whole situation was a punch to the gut I never saw coming. It made me question everything I thought I knew about my mom and the family. I drove straight to my mom's house that night. I didn't call, I didn't text, I just showed up. She was in the kitchen making tea, acting like nothing had happened. I asked her point blank where the cabin money was. She didn't even flinch. She just said something like, "Ty, that place was too much work for you. I took care of it." I felt like my head was going to explode. I told her it wasn't hers to sell, that Uncle Ron left it to me for a reason. She shrugged and said, "It's done, Tyler. Let's not make this a family war." That was the moment I realized she'd been planning this the whole time. The calm way she said it, like she was brushing off some small inconvenience, hit me harder than any argument could have. I wanted answers, but she wasn't going to give me any. I left that night feeling more betrayed and lost than ever. It was like she had rewritten the rules of our relationship without asking me. I barely slept that night, kept replaying every conversation I'd ever had with my mom about the cabin, wondering if she'd been testing the waters or planting seeds for this. The more I thought about it, the more I realized she'd never actually liked that place. She used to complain about how far away it was, how cold the winters were, how Ron was wasting his life up there. I guess I just assumed it was harmless nagging. I was seeing it as something else entirely. I called my cousin Mark the next day to see if he knew anything, and he told me he'd heard rumors that my mom was trying to sell the cabin even. Before Uncle Ron died, that's when the betrayal really sank in. This wasn't impulsive. It was calculated. It was a punch to the gut, knowing she'd been planning this behind my back the whole time. I felt like I had been living in a lie. That the mom I thought I knew was someone else entirely? Mark said he never wanted to get involved. But just knowing he had heard those rumors made me feel even more alone in the whole thing. The worst part was finding out how cheap she'd sold it. I got a copy of the sale record online, and she'd let it go for about half of what similar properties in that area were worth. She told me she either needed the cash fast, or there was some underthatable deal going on. I tried confronting her again, but she refused to answer my calls. The last text I sent her just said, "I'm not letting this go," and I meant it. I started looking into whether I could sue her or somehow reverse the sale, but every lawyer I spoke to basically said the same thing without catching her in some sort of provable fraud. I was screwed. Apparently, family betrayal is legal as long as you dress it up in enough paperwork. It was frustrating to realize that even though I had proof, the will was clear. The law didn't really care about family ties or promises, only about what was signed and filed. That sense of powerlessness crushed me more than I expected. I started digging into every bit of paperwork I could get my hands on. I called the town clerk's office, the county recorder, even the state property registry. That's when I learned. She'd filed a transfer of ownership form right after Ron's death, claiming I'd declined the inheritance. I have no idea how she got away with it, but my signature on the document was obviously forged. The clerk even admitted off the record that it didn't look quite right, but unless I took it to court, there was nothing they could do. It was like running headfirst into a wall. Everyone agreed it was shady, but no one wanted to touch it. Meanwhile, whoever bought the cabin had already started renovations, which in my mind meant gutting all the things that made it feel like Ron's place. I couldn't stand the thought of some stranger tearing down the memories and history I'd shared with my uncle. Every call I made felt like hitting a dead end, and with each refusal to help, I felt more isolated. The legal system was supposed to protect me, but all I found were loopholes and silence. The idea of losing that cabin hurt more than I expected. It wasn't just about property or money. It was a piece of my uncle, a place that held every fishing trip, every late-night conversation by the fire, every little habit he had. I could still see his old thermos sitting on the counter in my head, still hear the way the screen door slammed shut. Knowing my mom had erased that and done it behind my back made it feel like I'd lost him all over again. The kicker was, when I found out she'd used part of the money to redo her kitchen, I saw the new granite counters and stainless steel appliances in a Facebook post. That was the moment I decided I couldn't talk to her anymore. Not for a long time, maybe not ever. It felt like she took more than just a cabin. She took a part of my family's soul. Kept scrolling through the pictures, each shiny new fixture, a reminder of what was gone. It's strange how something so material can carry so much weight, emotionally. But losing that cabin was like losing a piece of myself I never expected to lose. Cutting her off wasn't as dramatic as I thought it would be. There was no screaming match, no big announcement to the family. I just stopped calling, stopped showing up to birthdays and holidays, stopped pretending we were okay. My phone would light up with her name sometimes, but I never answered. A couple of times she left voicemails, all short and casual, like she was asking me to pick up milk on the way home. No apology, no acknowledgement of what she'd done. That silence from her said more than any words could. It told me she didn't think she'd done anything wrong, and that honestly made it worse. It was like she erased me from her life without any explanation or remorse, which hurt in ways I hadn't anticipated. I felt like a ghost in my own family, someone who once mattered, but was now just a distant memory. The distance between us grew wider with every unanswered call, every ignored message. About 3 months later, I drove up to Vermont one last time. It's not to the cabin. I couldn't bring myself to see it in someone else's hands, but to the lake nearby. I parked in the same gravel spot Ron and I used to use, sat by the water for a while, and tried to make peace with the fact that it was gone. I skipped a rock, just like he taught me, and for a second, it felt like he was still there. Then I got back in my car and drove home in complete silence. No music, no podcasts, just me and my thoughts. I wish I could say I have found closure since then, but the truth is, I haven't. Some things you just carry. It's not something you forget or fix. It's just part of who you become. Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever be able to talk about it without feeling the same sting of betrayal. Maybe one day, but for now, still too raw to face head on. Cutting her off wasn't as dramatic as I thought it would be. There was no screaming match, no big announcement to the family. I just stopped calling, stopped showing up to birthdays. And holidays stopped pretending we were okay. My phone would light up with her name sometimes, but I never answered. A couple of times she left voicemails, all short and casual, like she was asking me to pick up milk on the way home. No apology, no acknowledgement of what she'd done. That silence from her said more than any words could. It told me she didn't think she'd done anything wrong, and that, honestly, made it worse. I'd see her name pop up on group texts from the family about random things, and I'd catch myself hovering over the reply box before deleting whatever I typed. It's weird how quickly someone can go from being part of your everyday life to feeling like a stranger you used to know. Could walk past her in a grocery store now and not know what to say, and that's not something I ever thought would happen with my own mother. The rest of the family noticed, of course, but most of them just stayed out of it, like they were afraid to pick a side. About 3 months later, I drove up to Vermont one last time. Not to the cabin. I couldn't bring myself to see it in someone else's hands, but to the lake nearby. I parked in the same gravel spot Ron and I used to use, sat by the water for a while, and tried to make peace with the fact that it was gone. I skipped a rock, just like he taught me, and for a second, it felt like he was still there. The air was cold enough to sting my cheeks, and the smell of pine trees hit me the second I stepped out of the car. I stayed there longer than I expected. Watching the light change over the water, remembering the way Ron's laugh echoed across it. It was one of those moments where time doesn't feel real. You're there, but your head is replaying years of memories like a slideshow you didn't ask to watch. Then I got back in my car and drove home in complete silence. No music, no podcasts, just me and my thoughts. I wish I could say I've found closure since then, but the truth is, I haven't. Some things you just carry, and I think this is one of them. After that trip, I tried to focus on other things, work, friends, anything to distract me, but every time I closed my eyes, I'd see the cabin. The way it used to look in the early morning light, with fog hanging over the lake. I kept thinking about how different things might have been if my mom had just told me the truth from the start. Maybe I could have stopped the sale or at least said goodbye properly. Instead, it felt like she stole a part of my life and erased it without a second thought. What hurt the most was knowing that she never seemed to regret it, even family. Gatherings felt awkward, like there was this invisible wall between us. I wasn't just mourning a cabin anymore. I was mourning the trust I'd lost in my own mother. Every time someone brought up family memories, I found myself holding back, unsure if I wanted to share or just keep those moments locked away. I felt like there was this chapter of my life that no one else could read or even wanted to acknowledge. The whole situation left a bitter taste, and no matter how hard I tried, the pain was always just beneath the surface. A few weeks later, I got a call from someone I didn't recognize. It was the new owner of the cabin. At first, I thought about hanging up, but I stayed on the line. He told me they were planning to turn the place into a rental for tourists, that some of the neighbors weren't happy about the changes. He asked if I wanted to meet and maybe share some history about the place. I didn't know what to say. On one hand, it felt like an intrusion, like my memories were being commodified. On the other, it was the first time since the sale that I heard the cabin mentioned with any kind of respect. I agreed to meet him, curious but guarded. That day felt surreal, standing on the porch of a place that was mine and not mine at the same time, trying to hold on to something slipping further away. The house felt different with new paint and updated windows. But some things couldn't be changed, the way the wind moved through the trees, the distant call of loons on the lake. It was strange to see strangers living where my uncle had built so many memories. I left that day feeling a mix of sadness and strange closure. I'm sure how to feel about the future of the place that meant so much to me. A few days after meeting the new owner, I found myself going back through old photos. of the cabin ones from when I was a kid. Blurry shots of fishing poles leaning against the porch, my uncle's dog sleeping by the door. Each picture was like a snapshot of a life that felt both distant and impossibly close. I realized that no matter what happened, those memories were still mine. The cabin might belong to someone else now, but the times I spent there, the lessons. Ron taught me about patience and quiet strength. Those were part of who I am. Still, it was hard not to feel cheated. It was like someone had ripped a chapter out of my story without asking, leaving me with a blank page and no idea how to finish it. I spent hours just staring at those photos, trying to hold on to something, solid in the middle of the chaos. They were reminders of better times, but also painful proof of what I'd lost. Sometimes I wondered if I should have fought harder or asked more questions, but hindsight didn't change the past. Those pictures became my only connection to a place that felt like it was slipping through my fingers. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about how family can sometimes be your biggest source of pain. I've had friends with messy breakups or bad arguments, but none of that compared to feeling betrayed by your own blood. It wasn't just about the cabin or the money, it was the principle of being lied to, the betrayal of trust that I thought was unbreakable. I kept asking myself, why my mom did it? And even now, I don't have an answer. Maybe she was desperate. Maybe she thought she was protecting me in her own twisted way. Or maybe it's one of those things that just doesn't make sense. Either way, it left me wondering how well we really know the people closest to us. I found myself going over old memories, trying to pick out moments that might have hinted at her feelings or intentions. Sometimes it felt like I was searching for clues in a fog. That kind of betrayal is the hardest kind because it cuts deeper than any stranger ever could. It's a pain that stays with you, unspoken but always there, shaping the way you trust and open up to others. Around that time, a few family members started quietly reaching out, but not to check on me, more like they wanted to know what I was going to do next. I could tell most of them were trying to stay neutral, but some were clearly on my mom's side. It was frustrating because I wasn't looking for allies or judgment. I just wanted people to understand what had happened. One cousin even suggested, I let it go for the sake of peace, but peace felt like a cheap word for giving up on something that mattered deeply. I realized that family isn't always about support. Sometimes it's about navigating a minefield where every step feels risky. That realization made me pull even further away. It was exhausting to have to explain myself over and over, only to be met with silence or vague sympathy. I started to wonder if it was even worth trying to keep those relationships intact. Emotional distance between me and the rest of my family felt wider with every conversation that went nowhere. I tried to focus on building my own life without all that drama. But the shadow of what happened kept following me. I found myself avoiding vacations or places that reminded me of Vermont. When friends talked about family traditions, I felt like an outsider. At work, I threw myself into projects harder than ever, maybe to prove something to myself or to distract from the hurt. Every so often, I'd catch myself wondering if I'd ever be able to forgive my mom or if I even wanted to. The whole situation had become this silent weight that no one else really saw, but that I carried around every day. I didn't talk about it much because the reactions were usually uncomfortable or dismissive. It felt like I was living in two worlds, one where I tried to move on, and another where the past kept dragging me back. Sometimes I'd lie awake at night, wrestling with feelings I wasn't sure how to handle or share. A few months after all this, I got an unexpected message from my mom's sister, my aunt. She didn't say much, just asked if I wanted to meet for coffee and talk. At first, I wasn't sure if I wanted to reopen the whole mess, but something about her tone made me curious enough to say yes. When we met, she confessed she had no idea my mom was going to sell the cabin. Apparently, my mom never told her either. It was the first time someone close to my mom showed any kind of regret or surprise over what happened. That moment didn't fix anything, but it made me realize the story might be even more complicated than I thought, and maybe my mom was hiding from more than just me. After that, I started to think about how the cabin symbolized more than just a piece of property. It was about family secrets, unspoken tensions, and the things people do when they're scared or desperate. It made me question what else might be buried under the surface in my family, what else I didn't know or understand. The whole situation left a scar, but it also forced me to grow up faster and face the reality that sometimes the people who should protect you are the ones who hurt you most. I still don't know if I'll ever get a full explanation, and honestly, I'm not sure if I want one. Some stories don't have neat endings, and this one is definitely one of them.